Good evening. My name is Alisson Fernandes, and I was born in the state of São Paulo, in the city of Jundiaí, where I was raised in an evangelical environment from childhood. Since my adolescence, I have been studying and preparing to be a missionary who goes where people most need a word, or simply someone to talk to. It was on one of the several trips I made, carrying the word that I could see with my own eyes, how much this world lies in the evil one and what people are capable of becoming to achieve their ambitions or satisfy their desire for revenge. In the year 2002, I was with other evangelists in São Paulo capital. We had made a soup kitchen and were distributing soup to families living on the streets, in addition to bringing a word of comfort. Among the many people we helped that night, there was a man who asked us for help to return home. He had ended up there because he was a drug user and had fled his home many years ago, but he was tired of the life he was leading and asked for help to return. He lived in Itatiaia, where his family resided on a large property in the rural area. Coincidentally, one of our collaborators was from there and said he could take him, and I asked to go with him as the reception can often be poor, mainly because he had left due to his addiction. We agreed to pick him up the next morning very early and went together to Itatiaia. Upon arriving at the house the man indicated, I asked if that was indeed the place where his family lived. We were in the car with a man whose life had been cruel, largely due to his choices, but the house, he said, belonged to his family, was one of the most beautiful in the region, not to mention all the surrounding land. We knocked on the door, and an elderly couple came out who, upon seeing their son, immediately embraced him, as they thought he had died a long time ago. It was a long moment of joy. We had done well to bring the man there, and we were about to leave when the gentleman of the house said, "Can you stay a little longer? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." We said yes, and he led us to the front of the house, which had a beautiful view, and began to speak. "You must have seen many strange things, haven't you? Well, I'm going to tell you something that comes here almost every night. Soon after my son disappeared, I went crazy not knowing where he was. We thought he was dead and looked for him everywhere for several months. We searched in neighboring towns, in the woods, in the centers, and on every corner during the early hours of the morning. Only one night I was returning by car with my wife and my eldest daughter, and we were tired of going out every night and not having any news. I kept saying on the road that we couldn't stop looking, even if it was to find him lifeless. I diverted my gaze for a second from the road and ended up running over something very heavy, which I immediately thought was a cow. I wasn't going that fast because these roads here are very bad, but the impact threw the animal about 3 or 4 meters forward. I opened the door to see what I had run over, but my wife screamed for me not to get out as the animal was getting up. You surely believe in the devil, don't you? And if I told you that I ran over a devil that night, would you believe me? The headlights of my car illuminated an aberration that I could never have imagined could exist. It was something with the body of a man, more hairy, and it had a head that resembled a pig, with large ears and teeth sticking out. The body of that thing seemed to be transforming right in front of us. When my daughter screamed in the back seat, I accelerated and tried to run it over, but the animal jumped far away, almost to the other side of the road, and stood there watching us go. I don't know if you believe in such things, but that night I saw a werewolf. Since then, I haven't been able to sleep properly, and my daughter only didn't become the same because shortly after she got married and now lives in another state. As you can see, the windows and doors of the house have bars, and the walls have an electric fence, all to make us feel safer when night comes. I didn't know what to say to the gentleman in front of me, as I had already seen some demonic manifestations, but nothing like something like a werewolf. The gentleman invited us to stay a few days, but my friend had some business to resolve in the city and left. I stayed. I felt I should stay, and we agreed that he would pick me up in 2 days. The elderly couple was happy about their son's return, but the story the gentleman had told me was very strange, and I sought to learn more about the strange creature. The gentleman said that almost every night the creature came to his house, so there would be a way for me to see it and clear my doubts. If it was something demonic, I would know. In front of the house, there was a small guardhouse where the gentleman said he would stay at the beginning of the nights to see if he saw any strange movement or anything that could lead him to know who the strange creature was. And that's where we would stay when night came. But I felt I should know more about the people who lived nearby, and we went for a quick walk around the surroundings. There were some houses nearby, all large properties like the gentleman's. Beside me was when we saw an old man pass by limping and enter a large house in front of us. I asked who he was, and the gentleman beside me said, "He lives there. He has several properties. He and his sons work with car rentals, houses and apartments. They made a fortune working on that." "And why is he limping?" I asked. "I don't know," replied the old man. "He doesn't talk to the people here. One day he appeared with his leg in a cast and has been limping like that ever since. He has tried to buy my house several times, but I don't intend to sell. This is a good place to live, even with the creature I saw." When night came, the couple's son seemed like a different person. He was clean, wearing good clothes and happy. He didn't even look like the beggar I had found. The house was peaceful, but I could only think about the werewolf the gentleman had told me about. When everyone went to bed, I stayed in the front having coffee and with my eyes fixed on the road. The gentleman said the animal sometimes passed close to the wall. Only that night we saw nothing. I went to sleep almost at 2 in the morning and nothing. The following night, which would be my last, I already thought the gentleman might be scared and imagining things, but I saw the creature he had seen for years pass by there. It was almost 1 in the morning and I was already in my room ready to lie down when the old man knocked on the door calling me. I opened it and he came in, going to the window and telling me to look. That's when we saw what at first looked like a shadow dragging itself across the ground. But as it got closer, the hideous figure that was there on the road became visible. It had exactly the description the old man gave. A body covered in hair and a head that you couldn't quite tell what it was. It resembled a type of primate with the head of a pig, but with tusks like those of a wild boar. It was the description of something out of hell, something I would never have imagined existed. Even from a distance, the figure on the road was frightening, as if it were the product of a nightmare, something from a movie out of someone's imagination. We stood watching the creature pass, but something caught my attention. It walked strangely, as if it were dragging one of its legs. The old man in all those years hadn't noticed, but it was clear that the creature we were seeing was dragging its leg in the same way that his grumpy neighbor did. When the animal was gone, I asked if before running over the demon he had seen anything strange in the region, but he said no, that it was after running over the creature that it started walking near his house. I waited for that night to end and for the day to dawn. Then I told the gentleman my suspicions. I think the creature that walks the roads at night is the old man who limps. I'm not sure, but it must be him who transforms, as both of them limp in the same way. Unless I'm very wrong, which I think is difficult, it all made sense. The old man became lame because of the accident and must be seeking revenge or trying to scare away the family so that he buys the house. I'm not sure if it could be that. Maybe it could be another person who comes from far away, but that wouldn't make sense. I left that day promising to return soon, and so I did. I went back there for 4 consecutive years, and in the 3rd, I received the news that the old man who limped had passed away. In the 4th and last year I was there, the gentleman of the house said that the creature did not return at night, as it had been a few months since it had last been seen, confirming my suspicions that the old man who limped was the beast. I'm still a missionary to this day, but I don't travel as much because I now have a wife and children to take care of. I've never seen anything even remotely similar to what I saw in Itatiaia, but the enemy of our souls is like that. He works in the shadows, uses the people who give him room. You think he's far away, but in reality, he may be closer than you. Imagine, if I could leave a message for those who will hear this story, it would be, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Good night. My name is Edvan Santos, and I reside in a small municipality in the metropolitan region of Fortaleza. The experience I'm about to share with you occurred shortly after I started working at the company where I am still employed today. It has been 15 years since I began working at this same place on the shift from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Around midday, I board a bus that travels the route and drops me off at the same point where I got on. However, to reach my home, I still need to cycle for about half an hour, as my house is not located on the main road where the bus passes. Consequently, I arrive home almost at midnight every day. I use my bicycle for the journey and leave it at the house of a friend who also works at the same company. On the return trip, I pick it up and continue cycling along a rather dark road made of beaten earth with constant dust in my face. At that time, I still lived with my parents and did not have the financial means to acquire a closer residence. The alternative would have been to work under the scorching sun. It's not that I specifically chose this job, but I have a great predisposition to catching colds, and exposure to the sun and dust would have been detrimental to my health. Well, in the locality where I live, there is a rather old cemetery whose facade is set apart from the other residences without any adjacent buildings. It is of the type that, even from the outside, it is possible to see the interior due to the low height and poor maintenance of the wall. Before the cemetery, there is a path that, if I were to use it, would allow me to reach home quickly. However, it is extremely dark and potentially dangerous. For this reason, I choose to pass in front of the cemetery and continue along the main road that leads to my house. Both paths present their own dangers, and the sight of those tombs certainly did not contribute to calming my nightly journeys. Time passed, and invariably facing the same routine, almost a year had gone by without me seeing a single living soul on my way, until one night, during my return, I observed a man cross the road and stop precisely in front of the cemetery gate. Immediately, I stopped the bicycle and stood watching that scene. I felt an impulse to follow the path, but I hesitated, pondering which would be the lesser of two evils: confronting a tormented spirit or entering a dark path and encountering a snake. I gathered what courage I had left and began to pedal slowly, always keeping my eyes fixed on the man by the gate. As I approached, I nodded my head and uttered a "Good evening." In response, he merely smiled and entered the cemetery without uttering a single word. I accelerated the pace of my pedaling as much as I could and arrived home panting, relating to my father what I had witnessed. My mother then suggested, "Well, tomorrow morning, go to the cemetery and light a candle for that man you saw. He might be a soul-seeking light. I will go with you, and I will even pray some Hail Marys so that he may rest in peace." And so we did. At dawn, I accompanied my mother to the cemetery, where I lit the candles while she performed her prayers. At that time, I was quite skeptical, and for me, such acts would have no effect whatsoever. We returned home, and shortly thereafter, I was already on the road to begin my workday. I shared what had happened the night before with my friend, and he, seeking to intensify my fear, added, "Man, they say that in that cemetery every night, a black dog digs up the graves looking for the dead. Be careful, as there are no guards there. My uncle was a gravedigger there and only went when there was no other option and during the day. At night, he wouldn't even think of staying there. He got tired of hearing voices, howls, people asking for cigarettes and drinks. He endured it for about 3 years, but ended up resigning. Today, Seu Inácio is the grave digger there, but he's only there in the morning. Thanks for scaring me even more, huh? I quipped, smiling, and continued on my way, hoping that the soul wouldn't bother me after my mother's prayers. Upon reaching the cemetery road, an intense chill, capable of frightening anyone, washed over me. I saw that head again, watching me, and hiding behind the wall. Imagine the scene. A cemetery alone is already frightening enough. Now picture being alone, almost at midnight on a deserted road, seeing a head hide while staring at you. Well, I lived that experience. If someone had come up behind me and startled me, the next day would have been my funeral for sure. I had 2 options: either pass by and face whoever it was, or take the path and die of fright even with the wind. Either way, I was in trouble. I mustered whatever courage I had left and began to invoke the names of the saints that came to mind at that moment, asking for protection from all of them. My only desire was to get home alive, and I was even making promises at that moment. It was then that I saw a pale man with white hair and wearing a suit. He looked at me and began to point inside the cemetery. I don't even know how I managed to get home that night. My legs seemed to have a life of their own because I couldn't feel them anymore. As soon as I got home, I fainted from so much fear. I woke up in the morning dressed in my company uniform, and my parents were looking at me. I told them what had happened, and my mother started insisting that she would go with me, saying that it was some spirit wanting to disturb us. We were in the middle of this discussion when my father said, "I'll wait for you at your friend's house starting tomorrow. We'll come back together. If anything appears, we'll see what we do." And so it was done. Every night when I got off the bus, my father was there on his bicycle waiting for me in front of my friend's house, and we would return together. I think the souls didn't like him because after he started going with me, none appeared anymore, thank God. But all good things come to an end. We were returning together, and before we reached the front of the cemetery, we saw a man in a suit cross the road. We stopped and stood watching it. My father, very serious, didn't take his eyes off the apparition that stopped right in the middle of the road we had to pass. It was then that soul pointed towards the cemetery and stood looking at us. He looked at us and pointed at the cemetery, then entered the woods and disappeared. My father and I left as fast as the law allowed. We were almost in front of the cemetery when we saw that big black dog coming out of the woods in front and jumping over the cemetery wall. I almost fell off the bicycle from the fright. I only heard my father say, "God our Lord protects us." When he said that, we only heard that howl coming from inside and a loud growl along with it. We started pedaling and kept looking back and saw when that big animal came out and stood there in front of us looking. I arrived home with my father, and he ran to get a scythe he kept in the kitchen. Then he returned to the living room and said, "That was a werewolf. That was a werewolf." My mother immediately grabbed a rosary and began to pray, and we stayed awake all night, afraid of what we had seen. When dawn broke, we all went to the cemetery to talk to the gravedigger, and he said that there were always holes dug by some animal, but he had no way of knowing what animal it would be. After that night, I stayed sleeping at my grandmother's house, who lived in another municipality and only went home on my days off. Thank God, I never saw anything else from the other world, and I thank the Lord for all the nights he saved me from being attacked by that creature. Sometimes I wonder if the souls I saw wanted to warn me about what could happen to me, or if they had already been victims of the animal I saw. I myself only believe what I saw because my father was with me. If it weren't for that, I would still be wondering if that really happened. But it did happen, and it was real. That night we saw a werewolf. Good night.